Welcome to Love with Eyes Wide Open podcast series with Lizzie, me, and Deana. This is a space for faith-centered conversations about love, discernment, and truth, where we learn to recognize what brings peace, listen for God's voice, and choose relationships that honor both the heart and the spirit. We are so glad you took the time and you are here today. So we're going to go ahead and start the conversation of Love with Eyes Wide Open. Why we decided to start this podcast series is we realized as we were writing the book how impactful it is to really spend time on talking about also things like discernment. On Mondays, we are going to be releasing one of our podcasts in this series every Monday. We are very excited. We have released our first book, Love with Eyes Wide Open, teaching our daughters to recognize red flags and God's voice in relationships. We have another one in our series that's about to be released in the Love with Eyes Wide Open, and we're both very excited about that one as well. It's pretty much for the women who may be confused in these situations. So some of us think very differently when we think of discernment. So what is discernment? Discernment is the ability to perceive what is true beneath the surface. It will involve our spiritual sensitivity, and it requires observations over time, recognize those patterns, peace or pressure, and listening for God's wisdom before reacting. Discernment also answers, what is really happening here? Or is this aligned with truth and peace? And sometimes we kind of lose sight of that when we fall in love, because most of the time when we fall in love as Christians, a lot of us have prayed for that special someone, right? So we keep ourselves pure. We're praying for our potential spouse, because that is something that is so beautiful. And the imagery, we think of Christ referring to us as the bride of Christ. And so we as women, we tend to gravitate towards the idea of marriage, but we're not necessarily taught how to have that discernment moving forward. And so that is something we both felt we wanted to kind of touch bases on today, but we'll also talk about the difference between guarding your heart, protecting what is sacred, as well as boundaries. And each one does a little something different, but they really work together if we do it right as believers. So the goal is we really want to help Christian women protect themselves before they're ever in these relationships. A lot of times we do think of our daughters, but there may be many others that are listening that have never been in a relationship, but you have prayed and longed for it. Well, we want to walk beside you to pray for your discernment when that person comes, so that you can avoid some of the heartaches that specifically me and Deana have experienced in our relationship. She and I both were married to the same person. She was married to him for 27 years. I was married to 6 years, but I also had a very rough first marriage, and I was married to my first husband for 14 years. So I learned a lot about what I wasn't looking for in my second marriage, but I didn't know all the red flags that I needed to be aware of. But anyway, so Deana, do you have anything you would like to?
Well, I just want to start off honestly with just this quote from the book that we wrote. And it is, if I could whisper one thing to every mother raising a daughter today, it would be this: your daughter doesn't need a perfect mom, but she does need a discerning one. She doesn't need you to have all the answers. She just needs to see you seeking those answers in God's presence. Now, I can tell you from growing up back in the early 80s that was a different time than today. And so I am casting zero blame on my parents, or especially my mom, because I can see myself as a young girl, and I wish so bad that I had this information from my mother growing up in a world where kids just ran out and played and did whatever and just came in at dark. Believe me, I miss those days. I think it's terrifying that our kids can't go out and play uninhibited the entire day. But with that, there really wasn't a lot of discernment used from my parents toward anybody that I was with or anything that I was honestly even doing. And so I had several near misses. Actually, 2 were grown married men with children, who tried to make a move on me. And I was maybe 12 years old or younger, 12 to 13. And then there was also just some younger boys that something tried to happen with. So I think that today we know how common molestation is, and we know how common toxic relationships are, especially when you have a young daughter or even not so young. You have a daughter that is heading into a relationship and you don't feel quite right about the person she's choosing, teaching her discernment at a young age to where she's choosing her young friends wisely. She's having these red flags when there's an adult that approaches her in a strange way. And she doesn't feel guilty about those feelings, and she doesn't feel that she's a horrible person for feeling those feelings, nor does she not understand those feelings. Because I remember when this happened to me twice, I didn't understand those feelings. I knew I felt terrified. I knew I felt shame and guilt, but I didn't know what that was or what to do with it. So what do you do as a child? You internalize it, because either the adult tells you that you're doing something wrong, or maybe even your parent tells you that, or you just don't know what to do with this. So discernment for a parent is so incredibly powerful, and it's so incredibly needed today to protect our, not just our daughters and our sons from predatory type people. And I'm talking about even just friends that seem like friends, or, an older visiting cousin or whatever. There are so many people, unfortunately, that are just hurt and wounded and potentially predatory nowadays. And even back then, when we were kids, Lizzie, there were still plenty of those people. It just didn't get talked about as much. So what would it look like then, Lizzie, for a mother, or father to have discernment over their children and create a protective wall for them?
Well, that's a really good question. Discernment, it starts with our children watching us and how we have discernment and how we are going to process relationships in our relationship with the Lord, because we know the Lord really directs our path and will give us those sense of discernment. And sometimes we question ourselves about certain things, especially people in the church. Maybe that is things that we need to start paying attention to and teaching our children to pay attention. You feel uncomfortable? Something seems off? Well, go to the Word, go to the Lord and pray about it and know what scriptures will align. I think a lot of times our discernment gets foggy when people who say they are of faith, because we will learn that are a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing. So we don't always see those signs because they know how to use the word to manipulate, to make them stand out. And Dean and I were just reading the other day something about holy narcissists. I never even heard it put like that. But if we really are keeping our focus on the Lord and we're really going to the scriptures, you're going to get discernment. If something feels off, say, Lord, something feels off, please direct me. And remember, discernment is observations over time. So if you are continually having these observations over time and you are continually having that spirit that just kind of makes you feel uncomfortable, that is what we are meant to listen to, because discernment, learning to listen and watch over time, will help us to guard the heart. And we're teaching our children how to guard their hearts as well. That's what it looks like to me.
I love that. I think another thing too is, as a parent who is in your children's lives. Now, that doesn't necessarily guard you 100% from something happening, right? But it's so important to know who they are hanging out with. Where are they spending the night? Do you know their friends' families? Do you know people they're hanging out with that are leaders? And I don't care if they're leaders in the school, if they're leaders in the church, if they're leaders at the campground. Who are your children spending time with? Who's going to be in charge of their safety? And really knowing those leaders so well to make sure that you give discernment a chance to even have a place in your child's life. If my mom had spent more time, getting to know the people that got to have some authority over me. But of course, you always have to think of the fact that when I'm looking at my childhood, my mom didn't have a mother that had good discernment. So it's very difficult to say that my mom should have had more discernment because she didn't have anything, to give her that understanding. No matter how we were raised or the kind of experiences we had as kids, we can now take that mantle on ourselves as a protective parent and find ways to discern the character, the motives, the actions, and the spirit of the people that are in our child's life. And that is simply achieved by spending time with those people yourself and getting to know them yourself. And then also, I think it's extremely important to have a strong relationship with your child, to really have that communication, especially in the teenage years. Those are really tough. Those are the years when your kid is rebelling and they want their own life and they don't want to be parented and they certainly don't want to tell you what's going on. But it's so important to do your very best to try to foster that communication when they're young, before they hit those teenage years, to be a safe, trusted space where your child can come to you and they can talk to you, and you're not going to space out and ignore them. You're not going to growl at them. You're not going to tell them that those feelings are stupid. So you're creating literally a safe place where they want to come and talk to you because they feel that you love them and that they can tell you anything and that you will hear them and you will give them good, wise advice. That's hard to do because sometimes our kids are going to tell us things that we would be very disappointed and upset and angry, things we don't want to hear. But there's got to be a balance. It doesn't mean your child can come and tell you that they lied and they stole something from the store. And then you're like, well, thank you for telling me. I mean, obviously there has to be discipline, but it can be in a way that is really validating that child for doing the right thing and for coming to you and for unloading their little guilty burden. But then they still have to have consequences because that's real life. So those are kind of my takes on it. Anything else, Lizzie, you would think
Yeah.
about discernment?
Well, I think it would be good to switch the narrative. What's one thing that I always heard growing up? Just trust someone until someone gives you a reason not to trust them. And how many times that we've used that and have come away feeling more confused. And why would we give that narrative when our goal is to protect ourselves? It should be the other way
Ooh.
around. We need to say, I will not open my heart. You don't want to walk around with your heart guarded to the point that nothing or no one comes in, but you don't want to have your heart wide open. And so to me, when you say just trust someone until you can't trust them, really opens us up to heartache and pain, and possibly being in a marriage or relationship that could be very destructive. And then it causes all those confusion and everything else. So don't trust someone. Do the opposite. Get to know them first. Remember, discernment is observation over time. So we need to observe these people over time. It doesn't mean that we are like Sherlock Holmes or anything else, or we're trying to label somebody. That's not what this is about. It's about protecting our heart, our inner core. I think of a cell. You have the outer part of the cell, and then you have the nucleus. And the people that are in your nucleus, for me, because that's my heart, I'm going to guard that. I'm going to be very careful who I let in. Both Dina and I are not here to label or, diagnose anybody. Our goal is just to help open each other's eyes and gain that wisdom and discernment so that we can kind of narrow this gap of abusive relationships that we have seen very frequently in our work with surviving toxic relationships of women that are in the church and they're hurting. So it starts with each of us. And as parents, what a great place to start, because they will follow you. That's obvious. And it's just as Dina was reading earlier, the mother just needs to be present to teach their daughter these things. We don't have to have all the answers. Dina and I definitely don't have all the answers.
Yeah, I love that, Lizzie. So literally, not like I trust you until you give me a reason not to, but I am going to be a completely protective parent for my child. I am not going to trust you with the most important treasure that I've been given. And then if you give me a reason, well, by then they've given you a reason and they've wounded your child. Perfect. Yeah. Love that wisdom. That's exactly how it should be.
Well,
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's also not walking into a relationship assuming the worst. I tend to be the
Mhm.
kind of person that especially in dating relationships, where I'm looking for that monster in the closet. So it's kind of one of those things. It's that it grows over time, watching patterns, listening to God. I really want to emphasize, even a parent, our time with the Lord is so critical. The best example I think my parents gave me was they always spent personal time with the Lord every morning. Not everybody can have their devotions in the morning. I have mine at night. but it's that them seeing that your relationship with the Lord is so important, because we know that through wisdom, it's through reading his word, it's through prayer, it's through those quiet moments with him, right? And so those are also things that we need to show it by example for our children. And it's the best gift that my parents ever gave me. So I think that will also help your process of knowing what to do, because discernment doesn't look like a cookie cutter. Not every wolf in sheep's clothing looks the same. They're all wrapped in different packages, different words. We always had this vision in our head that they looked kind of seedy, kind of shady, but that's not the case. They are so good. And they are sitting with our daughters in the church and with us. They're praising God. They know the scripture. And so our vigilance in spending time with the Lord and having that discernment and praying for the Lord to give us that discernment and wisdom is so critical, because they are everywhere. Deana and I would both tell you, our ex-husband that we shared, he could cry like the best of them. He can talk about the Lord like there's no tomorrow. But the problem was that was not who he was behind closed doors. And if I had the wisdom and the discernment to notice these things beforehand, it would have been different. I may not have married him, but I can't go there because I did. And here I am. I think God uses everything.
Exactly. And another thing that I would say is I agree 100%. You need to be an example of somebody who is in your word, is nourishing your heart and your soul with God's truth, is reading about evil and good, and that good can win out. But you also need to be a person that prays over your children and then acts. So, to give you an example, I knew somebody that was a wonderful woman, and she had a daughter that was about 17 years old. And this daughter babysat for me when my kids were small. And the daughter ended up confiding in me that her dad was doing some inappropriate things to her. And when I asked the daughter, "What is your mother doing?" she said, "Well, we pray together about it all the time." Okay, so here's the thing, guys. Even if you pull up the Bible, there isn't anything in the Bible that shows that God or his leaders or people who trust God and first worship God are just praying all the bad away. They pray, they ask for discernment, they ask for wisdom, they ask for God to show them the truth about what's going on, and then they do something about it. Okay. That would be like having a bunch of predators coming into your church and your leadership just prays that God protects everybody in the church. No, 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 no. But that's what was happening. The mother was just praying with the daughter that the father would stop doing these disgusting things. I'm sure that nobody listening to this is doing any of that. But I just want to put that out there, that if there's anybody in your life that truly feels that all they have to do is pray protection over their children and not know who their friends are and not know who authorities are in their life and not know anything about what's going on at school or the overnights that they're having with, so and so, that is not okay, because you have to do both. You use your heart and your spirit, and then you also use your head. So just a point.
That's good. That's really good. So I would like to ask a couple of questions, and I want to pause in between each question. So it'll probably be silent for a second, Deana. And so one
Sure.
question I would like to ask is, where have I mistaken confusion for love?
Where have I mistaken confusion for love?
What happens in my body or spirit when something feels off? Now, for those of you that are listening, those are pretty heavy questions.
I think that if you're in love, or if you have a daughter or even a son that comes home and says they're in love and they have this relationship, or even if they just have a good best friend, or this is about you and you are going into this relationship and there are boundaries there that are keeping you from going into a very deep relationship quickly, meaning intimacy before intimacy is really appropriate, because that can cause major emotional neediness. But if you're expressing that you love somebody and you are also very confused about the relationship, that is a very big red flag, because real love with someone of character and someone who actually loves you and cares about you should not feel confusing in any way, shape, or form. It should feel peaceful, grounding, safe, comforting, and consistently so. Not just one day you feel all those warm fuzzies and all those good things, and this person's protecting you and watching over you and won't let another boy near you. And then the next day, he pushes you down, or he treats you like garbage, or your best friend who loves you is now like talking behind your back and humiliating you. So anytime love and confusion have that same conversation, it's something to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Because if something feels off, stop, slow down, pray, take your time. Remember, the enemy likes to push and rush, but the Lord likes to lead gently. And you see that all throughout Scripture. So remember that as you are journeying through learning and teaching your daughters what healthy love looks like, and to avoid a potentially abusive relationship. We look forward to our series, Love with Eyes Wide Open. This is just a small portion of the things that we'll be talking about. So today was discernment. Remember, discernment is observations over time. It's your spiritual sensitivity. It's recognizing patterns, peace, or pressure, and listening for God's wisdom before reacting. One thing to teach is just, if you feel that spirit, just back off and pray. And if someone's trying to push you, that is not probably God's voice, because he doesn't push.
Yep. Back off, pray, and then ask a lot of questions and get a lot of information. And maybe even if it's your child that you're concerned about, put up some boundaries for that relationship for a while.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for listening to the first one of this episode. We look forward to seeing you next Monday. Thank you, and we hope you have a great week.